Let's bring our panel back in. We've got Chuck Todd, Hallie Jackson, and Kasie Hunt. Chuck, I mean, let's just keep on the security issue for a moment, because I got to tell you, I used to live here and work in these buildings as you continue to do. There's this sense that this show of force is the deterrent, that who would dare cross this line? But now that this has been exposed and a group of marauding protesters were able to come into Congress, not on just any given Tuesday when there's a handful of folks in there, but at a crucial moment where all 535 members are present and the Vice President of the United States is present, conducting a sacred constitutional duty. I mean, just for a moment, in terms of the security, don't you think that calls into question everything?
I think it does. I mean, 100%. I mean, look, how that could have been a hostage situation. Okay, I mean,
Chuck,
that
are you
is.
With me?
I am. It could have easily been a hostage situation, and so that's the part of this that you're like, we have to figure out. I mean, it turned out these folks weren't there to do that, but instead, whatever it is, they were choosing. That motivate themselves with obviously trashing the place and things like that. But that's why, I mean, what kind of message does it send? Others may look at this as at a point of weakness. But let me step back here a second. We've seen this in Washington before. There's a vulnerability is exposed, and then there's this immediate attempt to try to see if they can remedy it. And the real balance in the Capitol is this. It is a public place. There is you want this feeling that people can come here and walk the halls of Congress, the People's House, things like that. But we obviously have to rethink security around here. This was a total, complete disaster. And again, we're lucky that didn't turn into a hostage situation. That's what makes this, how the Capitol Police performed, just mind-boggling. Absolutely mind-boggling.
Yes, as bad as it was, Kasie, you can imagine how much worse it could have been as these protesters are going past metal detectors, and who knows what could have happened. There were some heroics inside those chambers that we've heard about, people barricading the doors, members of Congress, some of whom are former military. Kasie, what do you think will happen next? I mean, we know the old Washington dance of commissions and recriminations and investigations, but how do you see this going forward?
Whatever is going to happen, Savannah, the old ways of doing things, I think, are going to have to be completely rethought and reevaluated. I don't think any of us, I mean, I've been covering this town for 15 years. We've never seen anything like this. I think for a lot of us, this was simply unimaginable. I mean, I have gone to work at the Capitol, every day on and off for over a decade. And normally you see protesters outside. I mean, it's a regular occurrence, right? There's a long tradition of protesting in Washington. I arrived to the Capitol yesterday. I honestly was a little bit nervous, more nervous than I normally would have been. But I don't think any of us expected that they would breach the building, let alone the floors, the chambers, the places where these lawmakers do their work. And, I think Chuck's point is the right one. I mean, I've always been struck by the fact that there's a commitment to being open at the Capitol. This is the people's House, the people's Senate doing the people's work, and the people have a right to be able to walk into the office buildings, to be able to petition their lawmakers. That right is sacred for our country. And that, I think, is part of what has driven the way things have been done at the Capitol for all this time. But I think that there are incredibly difficult questions now that are going to have to be answered about how this was allowed to happen and how they find the right balance there. And there, I think, are going to be concerns, as Tom Costello alluded to, about what decisions were made and why they were made, because, obviously the police did their job in protecting the members of Congress. They were successfully and safely evacuated to secure locations and were eventually able to go about their business. And that, of course, is the most important component of that. The building is incredibly important and symbolic, but at the end of the day, it is just a building. You can put the building back together. You can conduct business elsewhere. So we are very, very lucky, I think, that there was not a member of Congress who was injured or killed in what we saw go on yesterday, because it's very clear that people thought that that was a real possibility at some points here. And while that is the most fundamental responsibility of the Capitol Police, this got way farther out of hand than any of us ever could have imagined that it might. Savannah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, a member of Congress or one of these staffers. There's so many young staffers and interns, and granted, where the pandemic, so not as many are present, but this was a moment where the Capitol was at not at capacity, but had a number of people there. We heard from one of our producers who had been actually inside and said that her mom was calling, and she was like, first, Mom, don't worry, I'm in the safest place in America. There's no safer place. I'm here in the chamber. And when I heard that, it broke my heart. Hallie, as I turn to you over, you're covering the White House, and as we continue this discussion of security, it's not as though this was a surprise. I mean, this wasn't, you didn't have to be a master of intelligence to know that something like this was in the offing. It was advertised.
That's right, Savannah. Listen, the level of violence and the level of chaos perhaps was unexpected, but this was not a light switch on or off. This has been a dimmer switch, basically building on media, social media, online message boards. People who are in sort of that far-right extremist group supporting President Trump had been talking specifically, Savannah, about this day, about January 6th. It was not unexpected that people would show up. There was a permit for 30,000 people over on the National Mall on the Ellipse in front of the White House. This had been previewed for weeks. People who cover sort of the dark corners of the internet, if you will, had been sounding the alarm bell that something similar to this, maybe not predicted at this level, but that something similar could happen, because this had been fomenting ever since election night, frankly, when President Trump refused to accept the results of the election. People who've been out in the field talk about how the rhetoric has gotten increasingly heated, increasingly violent, frankly, over the last couple of months. People promising to show up with muskets, these types of things. You heard that rhetoric, you heard that language from some of the rioters who were here at the Capitol yesterday. Listen, what happened, the level of chaos and violence that we saw at the Capitol, I think shocked and stunned many people, as it should, because it was ugly and it was troubling in many ways. Shocking, but not surprising, Savannah, at least from the protest perspective. This had been previewed by the very people we're talking about.
Hallie, thank you. Chuck, Kasie, you as well.